A date came to a quiet end, marked by moments that seemed utterly ordinary. But just a few hours later, when the sky had not yet fully brightened, a woman was discovered lying motionless right in front of her own home. No witnesses, no cries for help. Only a troubling gap in time filled with unanswered questions.
The victim, Kathleen West, suffered from blunt force trauma to the head.
What truly happened during that night? Kathleen Dawn West, often affectionately called Kat West by those around her, was born on February 15, 1975. She was an only child, raised by her mother Nancy Martin and her father John Martin. Kathleen grew up in Florida, closely connected to nature and especially drawn to outdoor activities from an early age. What caught my attention was that although Kat was energetic, confident, and had the air of a sporty girl, she carried a very different inner world, one deeply attached to dolls and an early desire to become a mother, a dream that seemed to form from instinct rather than outside influence. After graduating from Bloomingdale High School and stepping into adulthood, Kathleen began trying her hand at part-time modeling. It was during this period that she gradually became captivated by the image of Marilyn Monroe, not only because of her beauty, but also her femininity, sense of freedom, and magnetic presence. Later on, Kat often took the initiative to shape her own image in that style, a choice that helped her stand out, leave a strong impression on others, and create the sense of a woman who was confident, self-aware, and unafraid to express herself in a way that was entirely her own. Beyond her physical allure, Kat also carried a wild, free-spirited, and carefree personality, a kind of energy that I believe many men would have found hard to ignore. Yet behind that radiant exterior, she faced deeply personal struggles of her own. Kat had wrestled with issues related to the use of alcoholic beverages, a difficult cycle to break that at times affected her sense of stability. Alongside that, she lived with a bipolar condition, a mental health condition that is often misunderstood. As many people assume, it is simply a series of constant emotional swings, when in reality, most individuals experience extended periods of low and high states that follow a cycle, with stretches of completely ordinary daily life in between. The degree to which this condition affects someone varies widely. For some, it causes only mild disruption, while others require medical support and ongoing therapy. What mattered most was that by the end of her 20s, Kat had proactively sought treatment and learned to manage her condition through appropriate methods, allowing her to maintain balance and continue building her life in the way she envisioned. Next, in 2004, Kat met a man she believed was worthy of her affection, William Jeffrey West. Jeffrey was quiet, reserved, calm, and somewhat distant, a near-perfect contrast to Kat, who was always warm, open, and full of energy. Born in 1974, he was only a few years older than her. Beginning in 1992, Jeffrey embarked on a military career as a military police officer, later advancing into recruiting roles before eventually becoming the officer in charge of a recruiting center. Alongside his military career, Jeffrey attended Columbia Southern University from 2010 to 2019, where he successively earned a bachelor's degree in business administration, a master's degree in criminal justice administration, and finally a master's degree in crisis, emergency, and disaster management. An educational path that reflected a man who was disciplined, highly structured, and deeply committed to maintaining control over his life. Jeffrey was genuinely an intelligent, principled man, shaped by years of discipline forged within the military. After leaving active service and completing his education, he transitioned into security work, taking on a non-commissioned officer role on the campus of an educational institution, a position that demanded seriousness, responsibility, and strong situational control. Jeffrey had 2 children from a previous relationship that had long since ended, and he focused his attention on the life he was building in the present. Those who knew him described him as the kind of man who enjoyed outdoor activities such as hunting and fishing, deeply valued family, and approached everything with a sense of order and responsibility because of their starkly contrasting personalities. Friends on both sides were initially surprised to see Jeffrey and Kat together, and that surprise only deepened when, after just 4 months of dating, they made the spontaneous decision to marry in Las Vegas. Despite moving into marriage rather quickly, their relationship in the early years was widely viewed as positive and stable, and just 1 year later, in 2005, Jeffrey and Kat welcomed their first and only child. Their daughter was affectionately named Lola, and during that period, this small family appeared to be living inside a picture of happiness, where love, closeness, and a sense of security were clearly present in the quiet moments of everyday life. By this point, Jeffrey had settled into his role as a security non-commissioned officer on a school campus, a position with a solid income that allowed him to shoulder the financial responsibility for a family of 3. His duties centered on maintaining order and safety, identifying potential risks, and responding to unusual situations within the campus grounds. Jeffrey was also entrusted by management with the authority to carry support equipment while on duty, an indication that he was regarded as disciplined, reliable, and capable of maintaining control over his own behavior. Turning to Kathleen, if one looks at her Facebook profile, she described herself as a full-time wife and mother, but in reality, Kathleen still maintained a part-time job outside the home to satisfy her need for self-expression and personal freedom. Some sources described her as living 2 lives online, yet from my perspective, that view feels rather one-sided, because Kat never truly hid what she was doing. Under the name Kitty Kat West, Kathleen built an image clearly inspired by Marilyn Monroe, focusing on content that emphasized femininity, allure, and the celebration of mature beauty. Her private photos were shared on a subscription-based platform, and she was also active on Twitter and Instagram, where she once attracted more than 51,000 followers. In addition, Kathleen participated in a Facebook group called the Cougar Club, a community for confident, independent, and charismatic mature women, which reflected quite clearly how Kat viewed her own worth and her desire to live authentically as herself. Despite the sensual nature of her side work, it caused no conflict or discomfort within Kathleen and Jeffrey's marriage. On the contrary, Jeffrey was openly supportive and willing to help his wife, often being the one who assisted in recording content for her followers. For Kathleen, that sense of partnership made her feel both fortunate and genuinely valued. Although the path of online modeling was not a typical choice for a wife and mother, it helped Kat strengthen her confidence, nurture an optimistic mindset, and preserve the joyful spirit that was part of who she was. At that point in time, the West family seemed to have everything needed for a stable life. Not flashy or excessively wealthy, but rich in emotional fulfillment and contentment. A peaceful chapter that, as I mentioned, tragically was never meant to last forever. Having a child brought many changes to family life, not only in terms of responsibility, but also in how parents allocate their time and energy for themselves. While most attention naturally tends to focus on caring for the child, the need to maintain parents' own emotional well-being and connection is often overlooked, especially when they are also balancing work and everyday life. Jeffrey and Kathleen were fully aware of this, and although they always devoted love to their daughter, they believed that making time for each other as husband and wife was essential to preserving stability and harmony within the family. On Friday, January the 12th, 2018, Jeffrey and Kathleen followed their routine of spending time together by dropping their daughter off at her grandparents' home and heading out for an evening date. They had dinner at Papa Dough, a seafood restaurant in downtown Birmingham, then stopped by Red Zone Bar and Grill before driving back home. Along the way, they made a stop at R&R Wine and Liquor, located just north of Calera, Alabama, where security cameras captured Jeffrey purchasing a bottle of Jameson whiskey, while Kathleen selected a bottle of Lucid Absinthe. The footage showed the two chatting cheerfully, displaying the natural closeness of a bonded married couple, with no signs of anything unusual, to the point that the cashier later remarked that they looked like a very happy couple. After returning home, they continued having drinks, with an estimated 5 to 6 glasses consumed over the course of the evening. Near 10 p.m., Jeffrey posted a photo on Instagram, and around that time, he also helped Kathleen record a few images for her online work. But shortly after those seemingly peaceful moments, the evening that had begun so lightly and joyfully started to take a completely different turn. On the morning of January 13th, 2018, at approximately 5 a.m., the morning immediately following the date night, as the sun began to rise and a thin layer of mist slowly lifted from the surrounding fields, Alabama was entering a cold yet clear winter morning, signaling favorable weather for the weekend. However, while most of the residential area remained quiet, something unusual occurred. A young woman named Macorsha Purifoy, who lived a few streets away from the West family and worked an early shift, was among the few people out on the road at that hour. While driving toward Interstate 65, she had to pass the area in front of the West residence, and it was there that she noticed an object lying motionless on the roadway. As she moved closer to get a clearer look, Macorsha Purifoy immediately realized it was the body of an adult woman showing no signs of movement, a discovery that caused the peaceful morning to shift abruptly into a state of alarm. In a state of panic and uncertainty about what to do, she quickly returned home to call her father, and the two of them immediately went back to the scene just minutes later. The woman was still lying face down on the road, showing no signs of response. The father bent down to check and noticed that the body was cold, and after a closer examination, he determined that there were no signs of life. Shortly afterward, they contacted law enforcement to report the incident and waited for emergency assistance from the police. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, they quickly confirmed that the person found lying across the street, directly opposite the West family home, was Kathleen West, and her passing was immediately treated as a serious incident. Investigators noted that Kathleen was found wearing only a sports top, with clear signs of injury to her head, and beside her were a mobile phone and a bottle of absinthe, details that made the scene particularly striking. The surrounding area was swiftly secured, leaving nearby residents shaken by the unusual commotion in the early morning hours. However, throughout these initial developments, one person was notably absent: Jeffrey West. In fact, he was still inside his home and appeared unaware of what was unfolding outside. Jeffrey later stated that he woke up, realized his wife was not in the house, and began searching through the rooms until police knocked on the door. When he came face to face with officers and was informed that Kathleen had been found in the street, Jeffrey's reaction was described as unusual, as he appeared far too calm given the circumstances. There were pieces of evidence that both drew investigators' attention toward Jeffrey and, at the same time, details that seemed to lessen the degree of his direct involvement in Kat's passing. To begin with, authorities determined that the estimated time of Kathleen's death fell between 10 p.m. on Friday night and 5 a.m. on Saturday morning, and Jeffrey acknowledged that this time frame was reasonable for the incident to have occurred, while firmly denying the possibility that his wife had been the victim of an intentional act of harm. Jeffrey also stated that Kat had still been functioning normally around 10 p.m., the time when he took photos of her wearing a pink outfit that included a sports top, underwear, and high heels. Although these images were never released publicly, investigators confirmed their existence through the extraction and review of data from Kathleen's phone. According to Jeffrey's account, the evening had remained normal and free of tension until after the photo session ended, at which point a disagreement began. He claimed that Kathleen was paying too much attention to her phone and was no longer engaged in their conversation, which made him feel irritated. In a moment of lost control, Jeffrey took the phone from her hand, opened the front door, and threw it into the front yard, then chose not to continue arguing and went upstairs to bed at around 10:30 p.m. Jeffrey insisted that he did not wake up again during the night and believed that Kathleen went outside to retrieve her phone. He stated that he awoke at approximately 5 a.m. the next morning after hearing police vehicles and dogs barking, and shortly afterward heard a knock at the front door. However, this detail quickly became a point of concern for investigators, because a neighbor, who was the first person to discover Kathleen, told police that while calling 911, she saw Jeffrey moving around inside the house, an image she remembered clearly because it did not seem to align with his later explanation. In the early stages, officers were unable to reach a clear conclusion about the nature of the incident, and the initial theory suggested that it may have been an accident. They considered the possibility that Kathleen had consumed a high amount of alcoholic beverages, leading to a loss of control and a serious fall while outside, a scenario that was not entirely unfamiliar given her past behavior. As family members and friends had noted that Kat sometimes tended to move around frequently, act energetically, and be less cautious during similar moments. However, once the official forensic examination was completed and the scope of the investigation expanded to include the possibility of outside involvement, several details began to reveal inconsistencies between the original theory and what was actually documented, gradually shifting the focus of the investigation toward Jeffrey's connection to the events of that night. The forensic examination revealed that, at the time of the incident, Kathleen's blood alcohol concentration was measured at 0.23%, far exceeding the legal limit. In addition, a biological sample collected during the examination showed traces of semen. However, the amount was too small to be compared or to determine a specific source. The medical examiner concluded that the cause of Kathleen's death was severe trauma to the head, with indications of impact from a hard object. He further explained that given Kathleen's height of approximately 5 feet 4, it was highly unlikely that such an injury could have resulted from a simple fall, and he noted that the size and shape of the wound bore a striking similarity to the length of the liquor bottle found at the scene. When Sergeant Melhoff arrived at the scene, he quickly noticed the placement of the mobile phone and the bottle of absinthe beside Kathleen, because their arrangement was considered highly unusual. The bottle was positioned neatly and parallel to the phone, a detail that, based on his field experience, would be unlikely if this were merely an accidental fall. As a result, the most plausible possibility raised was that these items had been deliberately placed by someone. Subsequent forensic analysis revealed Jeffrey's fingerprints on the absinthe bottle, specifically his thumb and ring finger, with the orientation of the prints indicating that the bottle had been held by the neck and in a downward direction. At the same time, biological traces belonging to Kathleen were also found on the base of the bottle. Investigators noted that this detail alone did not automatically imply intent, as Jeffrey could reasonably have held the bottle in that manner when removing it from the shopping bag earlier. However, another factor at the scene made the accident theory increasingly difficult to accept, namely the presence of two separate areas containing biological evidence outside the home, one on the lawn and another on the roadway where Kathleen was ultimately found. This suggested that if the events had unfolded randomly, she would have had to sustain a significant injury, move across the street, and then collapse a second time. A sequence that officers assessed as inconsistent with the typical logic of an unintentional accident. The analysis of digital data from the night of the incident provided a highly compelling timeline, as the health app on Kathleen's phone recorded her final movements occurring between 10:45 p.m. and 10:54 p.m., while covering a distance of approximately 210 feet before all activity stopped entirely. The home security system confirmed that the front door was opened and then closed at exactly 10:54 p.m., perfectly aligning with the moment Kathleen's movements ceased. Afterward, the door was opened again at 1:51 a.m. and remained open until it was closed at 5:12 a.m. Data from Jeffrey's phone showed that his last recorded movement during the night consisted of 18 steps between 11:03 p.m. and 11:10 p.m., roughly 7 minutes after the front door had closed, and Kathleen was no longer moving, with his next recorded activity occurring the following morning between 5:12 a.m. and 5:22 a.m., totaling 59 steps and coinciding with the time the front door was closed again. What this sequence of data could not convincingly explain was the opening of the front door at 1:51 a.m., because if no one else was inside the house at that time, the only remaining possibility was Jeffrey himself. Investigators also noted that the health app only recorded movement when the phone itself was in motion, meaning Jeffrey could have left his phone stationary while moving around the house. From my personal assessment, this sequence stands out as the most critical piece of evidence, as the movement patterns of Jeffrey, Kathleen, and the front door appear to align in a deeply troubling way. Additionally, the theory that an outside observer or intruder might have been involved was considered, but the investigation found no indication of any credible suspect beyond the confines of the home. On the other hand, several neighbors provided statements that appeared favorable to Jeffrey, saying they did not hear any unusual noises or signs of disturbance on Friday night or in the early hours of Saturday morning, making the possibility of a public confrontation outside the home less likely. However, when those statements were weighed against other factors such as the collected fingerprints, movement data from mobile devices, the home's security system, and the forensic findings, investigators concluded that the overall body of evidence still created significant pressure, gradually placing Jeffrey at the center of the investigation in a way that could no longer be ignored.
An arrest and a murder investigation that's gained nationwide attention. It's been more than a month now since Kathleen West was found dead, and tonight her husband, Jeff West is in jail accused in her death.
On February 22, 2018, after approximately 6 weeks of continuous investigation and evidence collection, authorities made the decision to arrest and formally charge Jeffrey West in connection with his wife's passing. Jeffrey was approached by officers outside the home that morning before being taken into custody at the Shelby County Detention Facility, and with bail set at $500,000. The possibility of his release prior to trial was virtually non-existent. Before the trial officially took place, prosecutors presented Jeffrey with a plea deal under which he could have accepted responsibility in connection with his wife's passing and been released immediately due to the time he had already spent in pretrial detention. However, Jeffrey firmly maintained that he did not cause the tragedy and decisively rejected the offer, continuing to insist that everything had been nothing more than an unfortunate accident. That decision resulted in his continued incarceration for an extended period while awaiting trial, and the case ultimately did not go to court until November 2020, nearly 3 years after Kathleen left this world. As the case moved into the trial phase, prosecutors constructed the argument that Jeffrey was directly involved in his wife's passing through a forceful blow to the head with a liquor bottle, supporting this theory with a series of elements including collected fingerprints, data from the home's security system, movement information from mobile devices, and conclusions from the forensic examination. In addition, the search uncovered a shirt in the laundry basket and a towel in the primary bedroom bearing Kathleen's biological traces, along with the presence of multiple areas outside the home showing unusual evidence, and a liquor bottle positioned in a manner inconsistent with an accidental incident. All of these details were presented by the prosecution as critical links intended to reconstruct the sequence of events from the night the incident occurred. On the other side, the defense remained firm in its argument that Kathleen's passing resulted from an accidental fall, and they did not present any theory or suspicion involving the intervention of a third party, meaning that if an intentional act were to be accepted, all signs would inevitably point back to Jeffrey. Defense attorneys emphasized that no biological traces of Kathleen were found on Jeffrey's clothing or hands, that no hair, skin tissue, or brain matter was discovered on the Lucid absinthe bottle, and that there were no signs inside the home indicating a struggle or disturbance had taken place. Throughout the investigation and trial, Jeffrey repeatedly asserted that he had never harmed his wife, and consistently maintained that he would never do such a thing under any circumstances. During the trial, the case was said to have drawn significant media attention, in part due to Kathleen's sensitive online work, which inadvertently placed additional pressure on the jury, who were instructed to reach a verdict based solely on the evidence and not be influenced by bias. Over the 5-day trial, numerous text messages and voicemails exchanged between the couple were presented in court, revealing that they had experienced a fair number of disagreements in their marriage. Although most of these arguments revolved around everyday issues and did not directly point to a single explosive or severe conflict. In one text message sent just 8 days before Kathleen's passing, she wrote, "I know you're afraid to tell me you don't want to be with me anymore, but lying only hurts me more." In response, Jeffrey replied, "If you don't want me, just say it, baby. I want you. Do you want me? We've never really talked about that since New Year's Eve." Kat later warned him that he was throwing away 14 years of marriage. However, she also sent him intimate photos afterward, telling him, "Thank you for making me feel sexy." In addition, Information presented in court suggested that Kathleen had been dissatisfied with the level of intimacy in the marriage, as her emotional and physical needs appeared to exceed what Jeffrey was able to provide, an imbalance that may have created a quiet, lingering pressure within the relationship. Kathleen had also expressed thoughts about expanding emotional connections with other women within the boundaries of the marriage, an idea that never fully materialized, but nonetheless was difficult to separate from marital tension. Throughout the trial, Jeffrey's parents naturally stood by and defended their son. But what surprised many observers was that Kathleen's parents did the same, at times becoming some of the strongest voices describing Jeffrey as a devoted husband and a father who showed deep care for his daughter. From the outside, Jeffrey was widely perceived as calm, emotionally controlled, and largely devoid of any signs suggesting aggressive behavior. He was educated, shaped by years in a highly disciplined environment, and accustomed to remaining composed under pressure, qualities that on one hand made him appear trustworthy to many, while on the other raised a lingering question of whether that composure was simply his nature or a carefully maintained exterior concealing a more complex inner world. Nevertheless, the jury ultimately chose to focus on the chain of evidence presented in court, rather than the image of Jeffrey that had been constructed throughout the trial, and the outcome did not fall in his favor. After approximately 5 hours of deliberation, they reached a unanimous decision that William Jeffrey West was directly involved in the tragedy that led to his wife's passing, and found him guilty of manslaughter. According to the jury's assessment, on the night of the incident, after Jeffrey threw Kathleen's phone out the front door, she ran outside to retrieve it, and Jeffrey later followed with the bottle of absinthe in his hand, resulting in a severe impact to her head that caused the situation to spiral out of control. In a state of panic, he was believed to have rearranged the scene by placing the bottle beside the phone before returning to the house and behaving as though nothing unusual had occurred. When the verdict was announced, Jeffrey displayed almost no visible emotion, a reaction described as one of complete shock in the face of the outcome he was forced to confront. After weighing all the arguments and relevant factors, the Shelby County judge, William Bostick, handed down a sentence he considered balanced and appropriate to the nature of the case, though not the harshest available under the sentencing guidelines. In his decision, the judge took into account that Jeffrey had no prior criminal record, while also listening to pleas from his daughter, his mother, and his mother-in-law, along with other mitigating circumstances presented in court. As a result, Jeffrey West was sentenced to 16 years in prison, with nearly 3 years already spent in pretrial detention credited toward that sentence. Based on current calculations, if there are no changes to his legal status, he is expected to be released in February 2034, and although the defense filed an appeal, that request was ultimately denied.
The Alabama Supreme Court rejected the appeal of a Shelby County man accused of killing his wife. Today, the court refused to overturn an appeals court decision rejecting a challenge by William Jeffrey West. He was sentenced to 16 years in prison last year in the death of his wife, Kat West, an online adult model. She was found dead on the street near their home in Calera in January of 2018.
According to reports from local media outlets, Kathleen West's memorial service and burial were held privately by her family, attended only by relatives, close friends, and those who had shared meaningful parts of her life. The ceremony was solemn and understated, free of spectacle or publicity, reflecting the family's wish to offer Kathleen a quiet and respectful farewell. Those in attendance came together to share memories of a woman full of energy, deeply devoted to her daughter, appreciative of family, and committed to living authentically as herself. In the memorial remarks, Kathleen was remembered not through the controversies surrounding the case, but through her role as a devoted mother, a daughter, and a friend who brought warmth to those around her. The family also expressed their hope that the public would remember Kathleen as a whole person, rather than viewing her solely through the lens of tragedy, and that her passing would be honored with compassion, understanding, and respect. As this story comes to a close, what lingers is not only debates over right and wrong or the cold legal details, but a profound lesson about how unspoken, unresolved conflicts, when left without dialogue or release, can lead to consequences no one ever intends. It is also a reminder that behind every case discussed in a true crime documentary are real people, real families, and losses that can never be undone. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you have any thoughts or emotions, please leave a comment as a way to remember the victim. Don't forget to share the video so this story can reach more people. Press like and subscribe to the channel to continue accompanying me in future true crime documentary episodes. Goodbye, and I'll see you again in the stories to come.